time as an absolute given is a phenomenon to which we have very little grip, very little access. In fact, the more I read about it, the less I understand it. And it's really only at those unguarded moments that I actually do understand what it is. So in representational systems such as photography, film, or 3D or virtual reality, time really is a domesticated, mechanistically domesticated phenomenon. It adapts, or it's closed into a specific amount of frequencies or flicker per second, or frames per second in the case of video or film. So that's, I think, one important distinction that maybe I wanted to begin with is that, so in a nutshell, the time of the camera is a time out there in the world, domesticated by a number of frames. One could say it's a contract, that as long as you stick to that illusion of your number of frames, you'll be fine, and you'll have a feeling of coherent representation. When you're in virtual space, everything changes. There, the time that your camera is no longer out there in the world, but is defined according to axis. So it would seem that there is an extra component that comes, that is that if you want to simulate your freedom in virtual reality or in virtual whatever it may be, you will have to know where your camera is situated. When we want to speak about the notion of duration, there is also one big point of attraction, which is, I think, stuck very much with my generation, and I think probably also with your generation. That is that as long as you don't have movie time, or as long the moment that you feel liberated, and I felt that way when I started working in digital, is that the loop, the idea of time as a repetition, and thus life as an unavoidable repetition of generations, and we're always doing the same of the previous generation, etc., and finding out about it when it's too late, that those notions that we could really say goodbye to them when we imagine them in virtual space. Because in virtual space and time, it would seem like the contract of time evolving to an unavoidable point in the future was no longer necessarily there. And that, of course, makes the attraction of many gaming architectures is that they suggest, and in the extent of that software as a phenomenon, software promises infinity, and promises something that could potentially go on towards eternity. So one always has to watch out for that, is that as long as you're in, the moment you're in computer logic, is the thing is playing a trick on you. It is also suggesting that if you don't master the code, if you're just a user of the program, you can So the last thing I ended with was suggesting more or less that I didn't belong to the school of believers in, let's say, the religion of narrative and cinema. My exploration is more that of background duration. All those aspects in film that never really come to the foreground, um, because they're eclipsed by more important stuff such as storytelling, narrative, death and tragedy, whatever have you. And that this is not my field. So I try to explore time as uh, one could say as a landscape, something to spend longer periods of time in. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
You're back.
Um, you, I think it was Katarina who introduced the close, and I was wondering if I would maybe, relating to that topic, maybe show a few images of it and elaborate a little bit on the work. Does that make sense? Okay, I don't hear Dieter anymore. Dieter is gone for me. I don't hear him.
Now, okay, I will
Okay,
have to
yeah,
give it again.
again.
So we could start with a contemporary work and go back in history then, to go back to earlier pieces. Is that a nice
Okay,
idea? Yeah, to go
yeah,
backward in time, talking about time.
okay. Good. So I will see again about the sharing of my PowerPoint. There it is. Uh,
Yes, we see it.
so because the close really polarizes those two aspects of a lecture of the moving image as something from the past, quite literally by taking film footage that is situated somewhere in the 1910 and confronting it to virtual space. So virtual space, and the difficulty I made myself in the close, which I saw Dieter saw, is that I wanted to have a transition between those two regimes, which a transition which would be invisible. Which would be invisible technically, image-wise. Uh, Nevertheless, it would become perceptible over time. And I show you some research images maybe of that piece. I took about 10 years making it. So if you're a student, don't follow my example, because
Uh-huh.
I'm very impatient person, always was, but I make works which take longer and longer to produce. And some impressions of starting to build the street, some drawings. These are drawings that sometimes date back many years. Those drawings give me impressions of what to do. They also help me in explaining to the people I work with who sit behind the desk and they need impressions of something to get an idea of what I want to convey. But it also helps myself in saying, David, where actually do you want to end up with?
Mhm.
Because usually having an idea is like being an archaeologist. You find a place, and by thinking that you found the place, you think you have discovered it all. But the reality is that it only starts then. And you really have to dig very carefully. If you're not careful, you destroy what you have found. So that's why I spend
Mhm.
a lot of time in, or maybe I'll, uh, in researching.
Mhm.
And I had a piece of footage which showed a man, a puppeteer in a street, people posing in front of the camera. These are the early years of cinematography where it was a fashion if cinematographers would go out and they would they would portrait what's known as city life, and they would record a number of seconds or minutes, and all people in the street would be kind of surprised and amazed with this magical device that's all of a sudden there. That's the beginning of the history of cinema. We are not at the end, but we are at a very important transitional period where we are saying goodbye to the lens. And to the lens also meant a device is a particular way of being in the world. And because the lens work with light, it automatically implies hope, and it opposes darkness. The future of cinematography is far more reliant on scanning techniques, simulations. In other words, suppositions of what would be out there, reduced to a certain degree to something that we all accept looks the part.
Can you comment on the image which you're just showing here, this whole series of
So
cameras?
there's one child which is the main figure in the film, and she this camera setup makes a portrait of her. It's 50 cameras, and they are both the bullet time, but they also allow for us to create a scan, a 3D scan of her body. And this is how essentially we capture her and we manage to put her back into this 1910 street in Glasgow. It's very technically complicated procedure, precisely because it had to be invisible. The transition between the past and the future had to be invisible, unnoticeable. There was an important sound component. Many people will think it's accompanied by a piece of music, but the piece of music is in fact itself in a relation to the mute film, in the sense that it is quiet for most of the time, and at the very end, at the 3D end, where we make this uncanny portrait of this girl and we discover all the parts of her body, the sound, we do the same with sound. So voices are all over and around you, in some kind of dialogue with one another. We used 24 voices, and we did an interpretation of a short piece by Arvo Pärt, which has this as a subject matter. It has this building up of voices, forming some kind of architecture. So these are impressions of the studio recording, and then let me see if oh yeah, then we have some impressions of the studio built up. This is rather elaborate, so it goes in very different chapters. One chapter is in a big studio like this one, where we reconstruct the street from the film footage, and we paint the pavement. We have green screens on the sides. We simulate early morning, damp, wet street. These are some trials with young children, figurants. Like all of you young artists, when I start this, I don't know where I'm going to end up with. So there's no there's no exact plan. It's important, I guess, to keep in the back of your mind the energy that you want to convey rather than the image. In my experience, if I chase the image, I usually lose. If I chase the energy I want to convey with it, I usually find it back. So there's a lot of things that you don't have under control when you work with children. And we didn't plan much. We basically had situations from the film footage that we loosely used as topics for the scene, and then went filming for about 2 or 3 days on location with 50 to 70 different people and children. these are some more impressions. And then, of course, there's a massive amount of footage, and at one point it becomes clear that this person will become the main character just because she was unable to act, and that worked very well. And there we have the studio again. Don't
Yeah.
mind the keynote too very much. It's a bit everything mixed together.
Yeah, it's fine. But I find this image very interesting as you brought up the topic of the lens, because in your earlier work, the lens is like one lens, and it's what you call the contract of time with the frames. It's kind of clear, even though it merges photography and filmic time, which is a big step already. But here you have now these 50 lenses. And it's interesting that it still uses lenses, but makes something out of them which escapes the logic of the lens in a way. And there are other works like Olympia or I don't know about the Wildfire, which don't use any lens at all. Is that true?
Wildfire uses a hybrid, such as this, in fact, partly filmed in a forest,
Uh-huh.
partly filmed with a camera in a forest, and then not showing the forest at all, but the camera movement. So there are also ways of but what's always present is the sense of going blind, of losing the capacity of the lens and replacing it with data. So in this rig that we have here, we are in the end replacing the photographic part with photogrammetry. So where the photos serve to detect a shape and are then being disconnected from that shape. The textures are being disconnected from that shape and later are being projected back onto the virtual shape. So what we do, ironically almost, is we basically dissect the object or the humans that will be the subject matter, and we literally peel off the skin, reconstruct the bones and the flesh, and then project the skin back on it. It has the added benefit of course, controlling the light and controlling where the camera is. But the close is unorthodox on all respects, precisely because it had to mix two regimes in an invisible way. Usually you can make a cut, but I didn't want to have any cut. I wanted to have a coherent transition from the old footage to the hyper-defined virtual image.
If we go one step now back in history of your work, so to say, from the close to the Olympia, and they, because which has a different time concept again, as far as I understand, And do you have it in the PowerPoint somewhere?
I do.
There it is. Yeah, fine. Okay.
So here is Olympia. Olympia is indeed a very different matter, and so in a nutshell, it's a piece of software. Remember, we spoke briefly about software and its ambitions for eternity. It's almost software is really one of those great modern concepts of hardware which dissolves into data, which facilitates a lot, but is discrete itself. So it doesn't have any hard shape itself. So it does have a link with eternity. And at one point, I found myself visiting the Olympia Stadium for the so manyth time. And I had this perverse idea. I say perverse carefully because I was pretty upset with myself. as to why do you have to have ideas like this that are going to um, harass you for the rest of your life. So the Olympic Stadium, which was built in a hurry and which is problematic on all levels of maintenance, restoration. It's basically a piece of theaterbühne, which is not meant to last. But of course, conceptually, so we are again at software, the Third Reich was. And we have this with many ideas throughout modernity that make big, ambitious throw to eternity. With the Third Reich, we could have said it is 1,000 years. And that led me to make a concept of inventing or developing a piece of software that would last a millennium. And during that millennium, the Olympic Stadium starts from intact the way it opened in 1936. And we slowly let it degrade. So how does a place degrade, such as Chernobyl or the places that are surrounding sites of nuclear catastrophe, for example, is nobody touches them. So there's no more human intervention. And vegetation starts to grow, and it's ultimately vegetation that will start to undermine the structure of the building. It will start to break up the pavement. In the Olympic Stadium, from inside, as a piece of software, this building will start to collapse because the trees are growing higher and higher from the inside of the stadium. Here we have short overview of time, conceptual time, as what would three empires be. And then we have here some documentation of the building of the Olympic Stadium. And of course, with my logic, the original footage of the building already starts looking like a ruin, doesn't it? Here's some fresh, I would say, wedding pictures, so the very early days. And then here's some early sketches of what I wanted to do with it, discussing with my team back and forth what would be the consequences of beginning.
Can you go back to the last slide? I just was
Sure.
reading autism.
Yes, autism. Autism is something that I don't know if I have something of the spectrum. I think the spectrum of autism is something that is available in everyone, but it doesn't manifest in the same way in everyone. And autism and not related schizophrenia are two psychological aspects which have kind of came to the foreground during my researches. If later or maybe on another occasion we have the time to talk about the camera and the visual culture again and language, we might encounter schizophrenia again. Autism on a very different level, in the sense that what computing can do is in fact nothing else than to extrapolate and interpolate the zeros and ones, and it can create a world out of that. Computing as such can misinterpret the world as something that is entirely computed. And this is something we will encounter in autism and to a certain degree also in schizophrenia. And in patients, for example, suffering of right hemisphere strokes who mainly have to rely on the left hemisphere. But I won't elaborate too much on that, but it suffices that the strength of computing is at the same time also its weakness. It
Mm.
can simulate worlds to an ever increasing detailed way, um, but it can only do so much. So, in the whole conversation about AI, and um, I think we should first look at how our nervous system works in order to modestly conclude that we're very far from anything that comes close.
Yeah. But I find this concept of autism really interesting, but you would say that this applies to the Olympia piece, but for example, not to the clothes or other works, because the Olympia is taken directly from the software and it doesn't involve any lenses at all and no archival material. So that would be the difference of this autistic practice to the other practices, which still have some kind of input from the outside.
I think one could say so. And the close also much more has as a topic the celebration of a young life, of light, of early modernity, while Olympia focuses entirely on the quality of
Mm.
computing programs to uh, try to convey something about the notion of eternity, huh?
Maybe
and
we
to
should
conf
explain just one detail because it just
yes,
occurs to me. The Olympia piece was done for an exhibition at the Kindle Brauerei, which has a huge empty space, which was used for brewing beer and now is an art space. And it was a commission done for this place, and it is in Neukölln, whether while the real Olympic Stadium is on the other side of Berlin in the end of Charlottenburg. So
exactly.
while the piece was on in Berlin, this generated, or how you may call it, simulated time was happening in the exhibition space, in the huge projection, and the real Olympia Stadion was still there at the same time. And you even took weather data and
We
daylight
still
and
do.
everything, and it still does, even though the show ended, the software still works on this 1,000-year project and takes all the real-time data from Berlin. And wherever the piece is shown, it looks like it looks at the same time in Berlin. You know, when you're showing it on the other side of the globe, it's dark most of the time, right?
Exactly. When we
Yeah.
showed it, we had this conundrum in while showing it in Australia,
Yeah.
and there decided to install another piece of software which gathers, but really only with the specific agreement that it shows a delay of 12. I don't remember. I think it was 12 hours,
Hmm.
10 or 12 hours. But usually, what it is, it's dark on
Yeah.
the other side of the world. So in
Yes.
Berlin, we had snow in January,
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Virtual
and
snow there and
virtual
real snow
snow,
there.
and
Okay.
we used radar data of the weather above Berlin to know exactly when it's starting to snow, how much snow accumulates, and when the snow is melting again.
Mhm.
And we did have people who raced out of the exhibition to the Olympic Stadium and back to compare those
Mm.
two situations. And they were it was quite successful in the sense that it really did look alike. Um, and I would add that the stones in the building, which was my tongue-in-cheek moment, the stones also are located on the same place as they are in the real stadium. So you can compare in detail. So it is about everything that computing can do, as long
Mhm.
as you depend on precision. You can just go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you can lose yourself into an infinite amount of details
Mhm.
that will be coherent in a certain logic, but that are also, one would say, really alienated from life,
Mhm.
which is accidental and which is full of forwards and backwards. Um, Surprisingly, Olympia becomes a meditative work.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, oh yeah, that's maybe it's good to show this image. This is the image that gave me the idea. You can see the amount of growth in vegetation and the difference between vegetation that gets a lot of sunlight and the vegetation that doesn't get a lot of sunlight. And I thought this was an interesting metaphor for life, isn't it?
But this
Um,
image was one that was shot on the location before you did your work.
exactly.
This image was shot
In a part of the stadium which wasn't restored.
yeah, okay.
It's restored now. You know
Yeah, yeah,
how good we are with our monuments. Yeah, it is. They should definitely not confront us with our past. It should basically uh, transition into the picturesque of to the tourist object. And then more studies. It's also about those things that escape control,
Mhm.
isn't it? So the
What did you say
vegetation is
about the
growing.
stones? Can you repeat what you said about the stones? You mean the stones in the virtual model are really on the same spot, or did I get that right? Or
Yes, in the building, not in the pavement. So the pavement is an algorithm,
Mhm.
but then there are locations where the vegetation grows easier than in other.
Mhm. Uh,
This is the Pripyat and Chernobyl reference. And
mhm.
this is a study of zenithal correct light of a sunrise and a sunset during wintertime. That's of course one of the advantages, that if you have strong computing tools, that you can effectively simulate your point of view, the real point of view, very well.
Um, so let's compare this with the clothes. While I was reconsidering your work in the last days, I was coming up with a maybe silly differentiation, but you say if you like it or not. Is there a difference maybe between generated and simulated time? Like the clothes more simulated because it takes a historic reference and simulates it as it looks as if it was shot in the 1900s. But for the generative, you have to just fix the parameter and it generates itself in real time, and you will see how it develops. So the generative is more open-ended and happening in the here and now, while the simulated is in the end a recorded piece,
Mhm.
which works like a video would work, but it's not a video. So that was
Mhm.
my
Yes, I guess one could say that this generated time, which is a well formulated concept, um, is goes back a little bit to what we said in the beginning about how artists, when that started to discover virtual reality in filmmaking, were confronted with this aspect of volume of time that they had hitherto not had access to, which, when one would compare it to lens-based time, um, would have really corresponded far more closer to life,
Mhm.
isn't it? And to an aspect that the lens and our eyes have in common is that we all depend on light. So now we are confronted with a volume of time which seems gigantic and which uh, asks a new question, or it throws up a new question. is what is your shape of being in the world in virtual time or in generated time.
But it also
But
poses a different position of the viewer because with the clothes, when I visit the gallery and I sit it through once or twice or three times, maybe, I have the feeling now I have seen it, you know.
mhm,
So because it's this loop, and after maybe not the first round, but at least the second and third round, I will understand where the loop begins the moment I entered the room, and I will maybe leave it after a certain while and get the satisfactory feeling of having seen it, you know. But
mhm.
with Olympia, you never would come to that point. You never saw it, you know, and nobody will ever see it. So, and this brings me a little bit also back to the Bordeaux piece because it completely exceeds the viewing time, or you said once for the Bordeaux piece, it's longer than the opening hours of any art institution will be. And this is even worse with the Olympia piece.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And
No, absolutely. Uh, that's absolutely true, and that's also an ambition. It's not a coincidence. It's an ambition to grasp this volume of time, which would be so surpass any kind of comprehension,
Mhm.
and to measure it against something else. And what would that something else be? Well, it would very probably be our own lived time. The fact of being with a screen where time passes. And therefore, Olympia becomes surprisingly relaxing or almost therapeutic.
Mhm.
It's a good device to help people who have sleeping problems because in a very artificial way it restores your biological clock, which is an uncanny side effect of the work. But the
What is
confrontation,
the proper way then to watch it? Should I buy the software and have it at night or what?
well, I think one day we'll get there.
Okay.
To this point, up until now, it's always when there is an exhibition, we take out the computer, we open it up, we update it, and we start from whatever it is today, the so manyest of November 2022, and vegetation has grown and everything. But it would be the idea is that one day it's available permanently, of course. But I think the most important to remember is that we confront notions of eternal time with the banality of lived time, um, in a
I have a very silly,
non-psychological way.
a
Let
very silly
me,
question. You want peep in a while when it's not on exhibition of how it's growing?
yeah, yeah, we have it on permanently in the studio.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So we check if the moonlight is good. Regularly there are hiccups, software hiccups. So that what will happen is that, for example, we don't have an exhibition and there's something wrong with the weather system and it's been sunny a whole month. Uh, and then, of course, that has its consequences. Let's say because we also recalculate the effect on vegetation and
Mm.
architecture according to the weather.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe we go now a huge step back in history, you know, so and come to the what do you say the Katharina, you want to talk about the Vietnam piece or the Bordeaux piece? What is
Hmm.
best?
Yeah, both would be nice, but also wildfire is super interesting. But
Yeah,
might I ask
I talk
something?
too much now. You just say now what you think.
Aha, okay. Maybe something, a question in between that came into my mind. Like you're super precise with your 3D works, as you said that each stone in Olympia you can somehow refine in real. And but I can imagine, like especially for Olympia, when you had like your first idea or feeling what you want to work on. How do you manage it as you do research and you dig like deeper and deeper and you find many facts, like also historical facts that are important and interesting, but how do you manage it not to lose your like first feeling and not to overload your work with historical facts and information somehow?
Yeah, that's the metaphor of the archaeologist. So you have the excitement of the first idea, and you stand there in front of the site and you think, great, my career is made with this work. And then you start digging. So I spend time. So I give usually maybe a year before really beginning to develop a work, so that we can have many back and forth discussions with myself. And I realize that if I leave something for a week and I pick it up again a week later, I have slept over it. And so I use this simple passage of time as wisdom, which is not really wisdom, but which is a way of tricking yourself into finding, looking at the different angles. That's one way. Not be in a hurry, and but I mean, especially with works where you spend a lot of time producing, and let's say 10 years or maybe even 3 years, you lose the thread at one point. So you really disintegrate the idea, and it has happened that at the end I had to admit to myself that I practically lost it. Also, I think an artist should admit to him or herself that when the piece is ready, one should also be willing to let it live a different life than the life that has been intended. Huh? Not exactly under control.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and maybe some, what would be also interesting to talk about would be like the boundaries between photography and film become increasingly blurred in your work, and especially the clothes. And starting with the piece Oil Workers, you begin to omit the information about the archival material in the title. And later on, you don't mention the date of your archival material. Why did you do that?
Um, it's a good question. It depends. For example, the oil workers, which I don't have the file open right now, but I think I can quickly find it. So if I go on my OneDrive again, oh yeah, so oil workers is here. So do you see it? Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, fine, perfect.
So with the oil workers, I did retain everything I could from the title in the document, because the title was fertilizing the image with the oil workers. The fact that the oil workers from the Shell company of Nigeria are being portrayed while they are sheltering for rain confronted those two aspects of language, oil and water, which don't go together for any creature, except in chemistry. And so that's why the title remained with the image, because it needed to fertilize. Um, the image of wetness as opposed to an image or a title of oil. So it was a way of being very indirect with the political connotations of the Shell Company of Nigeria and the way they work. At the same time, it's of course also a portrait of those people. And at the same time, it's also nothing more than a reconstruction of a found document. When an artist does that, it's a way of hiding behind the document or hiding behind data. The data being this thing found on the internet and the title of it. So I usually am very intuitive with that. In the close, I didn't do it, although I maintained the close as was part of the title of the document that I had found. Um, because it was more, uh, it just didn't require a particular moment in time for in order to fertilize the image. With Vietnam, it does require time and place. Often that can have to do with trauma, because having data with trauma helps to overcome. So having, I just think of a confrontation that I had with a war photographer who questioned me about my ambitions to work with one of his images, and who said, but do you really, you insist on using all the data, the date, the location, the time, and the photographer, but do you care about the people who are in the picture, who might have lost their limbs and their lives, or who have seen their lives catastrophically changed? And I think that's one of those aspects where, when you're in a representation, you the moment you're in it, you lose. You do lose contact and context, and having the data of the image. I mean, I try to employ it in a particular way, not systematic. It could also, in the earlier work, it is used to refer to particular photograph that you can still find easily in books and on the internet, and where I desired for people to find back that image in time. So as in Kindergarten Antonio Santelia, 1932, for example. But I mean, it's a good question. There are always intuitive reasons to pick it up or to leave it alone.
Okay. So
Um,
can we switch? Yeah, you go,
Yeah,
Katharina.
maybe another question also is connected to that. So in the earlier works such as Vietnam, the archival material, the photograph, is directly recognizable as such in the piece. And with oil workers, you begin to reconstruct the underlying photograph using 3D and immerse into the scene by means of camera movement. And when I'm right, the oil worker piece is the first piece done by you using 3D. And I would like to know why did you make this step to
Okay.
use 3D?
I don't think Oil Workers is the first piece. I think the first piece where I uh, exclusively worked with 3D was in a film called Travel, which depicts a journey of a disembodied camera in a forest, and it starts with it's actually based upon a piece of relaxation music, which I thought had ambitions in terms of uh, sizes and the shape of the volume of time and of space. And I thought I'm going to make a film that fits to that work. So Travel is the first uh, if I get it right, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I made travel before I made oil workers.
Yeah.
um, uh, but
I think
in
so. It was on show at the gallery in Berlin a while ago, the travel, right? And it goes through this
yes,
forest on, and you have the little river and all that, you know. So yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Um, and um, and travel was all about when you are in a coherent simulation, or when you're in a coherent representation and you get psychologically involved in it. Um, in travel, you get a cold shower because the uh, spatial ambitions that the music don't correspond to the spatial ambitions that the images have,
Mhm.
and they contradict one another in a gentle, almost imperceptible way. Um, in Vietnam, it's we're really uh, we're really talking about very well way back in time. So the document dates back from 1967, taken by a war photographer, Hiromi Shimine, and I went to that location in Vietnam around the year 2000. I think in January of 2000, or was it January of 2001? Anyway, it was before 9/11. I remember that as some people or critics accused me of playing on the terrorism feeling. But I said, no, I made it before 9/11, with this airplane crashing to the ground. And for the viewers, what's going on is that the light of the landscape, which I filmed on location, uh, the caresses, or one could say, caresses of light or sun showers and shadows, um, uh, on and off, they also move over the wings of the aircraft, and it's a way of showing the effects of weather uh, on temporality, on the temporality of photography, of this instant, of something that will never be as it was, and basically the weather and the clouds caressing the wings. It's a way of doing something with surface, right? With the surface of a photograph, which is forever a surface and forever a skin. And then, of course, um, it's almost like someone, cleaning off the past with a very soft brush, with a very soft plume, you know, afraid of hurting the object itself. And so what it conveys are senses of softness and cushion instead of crashing down.
Yeah.
And most of the works I make are exercises in this, what's known as synesthesie, the exchange of the senses, where vision or the visual will connect to other aspects of the senses, such as touch or uh, or seeing different colors, or noticing an aspect of time which otherwise doesn't belong to the image, etc.
Mm. And you mentioned in an interview that when you came to the place where the original photo was shown, just to explain to all students listening, the airplane is taken from the original photo from 67 and the landscape is your own footage of 2000. That the landscape had changed compared to the photo taken in 67 of the crashing airplane. Yeah.
Well, tremendously, at least according to my guide, who I slowly put the puzzle together, is that the terrain of the original airfield had been covered with a few meters of earth. for it to make the airstrip unusable. The origin of the photograph is Hiromi Shimini being on location while there's a fighting going on between Viet Cong and American troops, and is being accidentally shot out of the air by American troops. So it's friendly fire. And to my astonishment, I realized that 40 years does a lot with the landscape. And of course, when I came there, I imagined basically the landscape to be as it was. But a landscape changes like a face, doesn't it? It becomes unrecognizable, and you have to look into those details which are not immediately readable, like you would look into the eyes of an old man or woman to discover something of the children's portrait of the same person, in order to discover something of it. So that was a bit of a shock. And I guess that's always the case when you virtualize life. You have to agree that you simplify it to a degree where it becomes a simulation, and where it becomes for a while coherent with what we with what we expect. And that's one of the things that being in that landscape confronted me with, to see that I found very little of what was there 40 years ago.
And when you see it installed, the airplane is a fixed moment, and as I now understand, there's the light changing on top, but the landscape is moving, the trees are a little bit moving, the wind goes through and stuff like that, you know. And is there a faint sound? Is I remember right? Or is there no sound? No sound.
It's mute. It's mute. And the ambition of each work is to be mute. Maybe it's worth adding that as a comment. But that sometimes you need sound to get there.
So
But
maybe maybe as the last example, and then we open up for Q&A, we go to the Bordeaux piece. So we're talking about sound also. Is this the one which has sound and which has a kind of very clear narrative? Yeah, this is a historical photo.
Yeah, these are some early sketches.
Can you go back to the historical photo again? Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a big difference in the landscape.
Yeah, enormous.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, my point of view is not exactly the same.
Yeah.
May I ask you something about the point of view? Because I was wondering how you make the decision where to, like, even if you have this complete 3D model and there's no lens existing anymore, how do you decide where to what about the point of view, or sometimes you also have this eye contact to some people, maybe in the oil workers piece.
That's where the past helps. To simplify it, conceptually, I consider myself as someone who's blind. So let's say blind people actually don't see darkness. Blind people see just like we do, except that they don't have their eyes to pass on the signals and light and memory. And so they have to visualize from abstractions. So I consider myself being blind, and then I say, okay, before I was blind, what did I see? And that's also why I think of my work as a bit of a history of the camera. I look at what others did with the camera, and I look I usually get ideas from what others do with their images. I go to libraries. This is my sort of meditative hour of the days when I'm in a library and I'm just wandering around and opening books and applying the wrong false context to a new context and infecting an image which doesn't want to convey anything uh, that I'm associating it with, and instead make something new. So usually it's the work of others that is crucial in order to make something new. Um, that doesn't mean that it's dead matter, but it is an easier way of getting access, I feel, to aspects of composition and of the camera which we have in common, which we could see while closing our eyes. And that's how I usually would compose my images. It also depends from project to project. And it depends. Like another piece that we didn't discuss was Sunrise. There I worked with a cinematographer who did most of the composition work. And I was mainly trying to get the timing right and the rhythm and the slowness. And I was trying to get those aspects right where somebody else was doing the composition. So there's not a one size fits all solution.
Can I also ask you something in between? Like from earlier works to the latest one, in your pieces, you got such a high level of hyperrealism. And yeah, what does this mean to you? Why is the realistic representation in your work that important?
Okay, it's a good question because realism in media or in technology is very, very temporary, isn't it? When we think about how amazed visitors or spectators of early moving images were, and what effect it had on painters, what Muybridge and others had on what painters did with movement, etc., is wait, oh God, I lost my thread again. Say me again your question, please.
Okay, I wanted to know, yes, as your pieces become real,
Oh,
yeah,
realism. Yes,
hyperrealism,
realism.
why?
Indeed. Is that so? Realism is a very temporal thing. We exchange realism from generation to generation, isn't it? And it goes quite fast. In our generation, actually in yours, a certain connection to the camera is dissolving. And I find that very interesting. And that also poses the questions to realism. Usually, this is, in fact, answers also part of the previous question is how would I do my compositions and why would I work from archival material? That is because I think I know that anything that wants contemporaneity, anyone who wants contemporaneity to be on his or her side will lose. Your children, if you have any, they will look entirely different at the content that I, for example, am producing. Or when I look at the original footage of the close, I have absolutely no access or very little access to that time. I have lost the fashion of clothing. I don't have any contact anymore with the technology. We don't film that way anymore. it's getting more and more difficult as time goes by. So the realism is always a very temporary contract that you have, is what's realism for now. And I'm very much aware of that. I try to include this component where I imagine a future generation would look at the material and would say, okay, this is something located in the past. But then there's maybe another way of gaining access to it. So realism is, my advice would be never chase it. In fact, on the contrary, try to include a certain artifice where you give away. The way Robert Bresson, whom I admire very much in cinema, works with actors who give away their lack of actor skills, and it allows you, it gives you access to a different experience of time in his films, and this is something I'm looking forward to always, is to give away the artifice of the work so that something else, usually time as sculpture, um, comes into place.
Mm.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, we have a quick glimpse at the Bordeaux piece, which is a little bit paradox in itself because you can't have a quick glimpse at this piece. But but then we open up for a discussion because it makes something up different to all the pieces we have seen because it has a clear narrative and looks like some kind of fiction, B movie, whatever, you know. Okay, yeah, and
So a few impressions of the film. They are about 70, I don't remember exactly, 70 or 75 short films. One made better than the other, depending on the mood of the crew and the mood of the actors. The question to the actors was, can you please repeat your lines as the time of the day passes by? And so, by consequence, also the shadows in the film. So the shadows become at least as important as what the actors are saying. The longer you spend with the film, the more the shadows become the subject, the real subject matter.
mhm. And the overall running time, if I would see all of these 70 something, is
I think it's almost 14 hours. It's a summer's day from sunrise to sunset. And it ends with, we stopped when we found out that the camera crew was reflected into the window.
mhm,
So we switched on the lights and
mhm.
No money.
so a brief illustration.
I am leaving for Berlin in half an hour.
This is very dark, but that's early morning. I have 4 seconds of each beginning of each film.
Aha, okay, that's nice, yeah.
In half an hour. You call me. I'm leaving for Berlin in half an hour. You call me. I'm leaving for Berlin in half an hour. You call me. I'm leaving for Berlin. Half an hour. What, me? I'm leaving for Berlin in half an
I
hour.
will jump a little bit.
Yeah.
Leaving in half an hour for Berlin. Yeah. Now you call me. I'm leaving
You see
for
the
Berlin
changing shadows,
in half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
and the actors are getting more and more exhausted until they start making mistakes. The wrong people come into the frame, all these accidents become part of the film.
I'm leaving for Berlin.
And depending on where you have your attention, you will start to see another film, which I would describe as the real time happening
I'm leaving for Berlin.
in the background.
Half an hour. Yes. What?
Of course, if, like you, Dieter, when you saw the close ones, you see it. With this, you don't.
Yeah.
You have seen one moment in time.
Leaving for Berlin. Half an hour.
When I saw it first, I think it was in the Akademie der Künste a while ago, where you had your kind of overview exhibition. I didn't get it at first that it's the same scene played again. I thought it's a loop, you know, because you're so conditioned to looking at loops. And it took me quite a while to find out how it really works because I didn't expect it to be as it is, you know, because you're not trained to see such things. And I think I was doubting whether it's my personal memory which makes about the little differences which I was getting to see, or if it's really in the material that is projected itself. And then I discovered only the label, which says something like 14 hours. And then I said, okay, it is really in the stuff, because you wouldn't believe normally first you see
Mhm.
how it is made, you know, you would doubt, you would think it's your error that you are seeing differences which are not there, you know, so
Yes, yes, exactly. Um, yeah, but that's this notion of sweet rebellion with time is always there. You want to generate something that maybe secretly you might notice if you pay attention, but mostly when you're in a hurry, let's say daily life, you will just pass on it. And I was always fascinated with that, how depending on the attention that we pay to the world, we find different things. And this has usually been my approach to much photography in general, is that I noticed that I saw really different worlds depending on the mood with which one is looking.
right. Yeah, also the production shots are great. Yeah. Ah, you built something for it also. Yeah, it is
Yeah,
cool.
there's one shot where we ask the actor who's a little bit unstable to walk up that thin wall because it was great for composition, to answer a previous question. And we needed to have him composed because that's where the shadows were most beautiful. So we had to give him a bit of extra stability and build a bit of.
Okay, okay. Yeah, 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 yeah. Because it's not, the wall is too small, then yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, great. Woo, yeah. So we are more than 1.5 hours into the ongoing thing. Are there any questions? You can either put them in the chat or whatever. Mare is also a big fan of you, who has the camera on. He will be interested in 3D works and will realize something of its own after the lecture, maybe. We will let you know if any kind of relevant works come out of the seminar which reference your work, you know.
Great.
Um, yes, Mare is applauding. Yeah.
Yeah, hello, thanks for the not show. So it was very interesting, and actually my question was a lot of so answered through the discussion, and but in this chance I want to ask you, maybe in the future, if are you interested in some real-time rendering? So I see your working process with those simulation and a lot of works, and I find so actually now you're using film or so how can I say slideshow kind of and animation
Mhm.
and but I'm personally is very interested in the new technology or the situation of
Mhm.
our new medium and I think so what you are talking about the time and the simulation and kind of very so close to the um, so opportunity or also maybe would be very interesting with the real time also kind of so game so
Yes.
uh, if
I'm
you have
going
some
to I'm going to show you something, if you don't
yeah
mind. I'm going to show you
oh really
something I'm working on
ah
to
great
answer the question about real-time work. Of course, Olympia is that. So we do use real-time rendering. We do have problems with the growth of the vegetation, which requires ever powerful graphic cards, which is starting to make showing Bordeaux Olympia rather expensive, because we have to use the most expensive graphic cards to get all the vegetation. So that's what you get. And another work that's real-time rendering, but one absolutely cannot see it, is called Backwards Growing Tree. And I will see if I can open it for you.
Thank you.
So, it's 5 years, and it's the life of a simple tree in northern Italy. It's located underneath Modena. And it is linked to, for example, yourself. Take it's your birthday. And when we say, I give it to you as a birthday present, it starts on that day. And from that day on, we have a contract. You grow older, 5 years in time, and the tree grows younger, 5 years in time. And it is occurring in real time. Not this one. What you are seeing is actually just a photograph, because we're still
Yes.
we have only started.
You're still sharing the Bordeaux piece.
Oh,
Yes.
you don't see this.
No,
So
no, no, yet, no.
that's funny.
No, still a film.
Okay, maybe I should have.
Maybe you end the PowerPoint and start up the new one, or
Yeah, I will think I will for a moment. I will stop sharing, and then I will start sharing again.
great. Yes, here we are.
Is this better?
Yeah. Fine. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I guess that explains better. And so 5 years go backwards in time, and your 5 years grow older. So it's another way of making a clock, or subjective experience of time. But subjective is relative, because it's also tough clock time. So that's going to be real time, also real time rendering.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions? You can also post in the chat.
Yeah, maybe I have also another question. I can imagine that it also needs to take time to watch your pieces. What do you say to people who have the feeling, who are not familiar with your pieces and somehow rush through and somehow don't get it? I can imagine that it really touches you, but what do you say to them?
I say perfect, keep it that way. It's usually what I say. But slowly but certainly, in my experience, the situation changes. And it's a little bit like also people change, and they take more time. But I have constant trouble with biennales, or let's say I was once selected to represent my country, Belgium, on the Venice Biennale, but it was impossible according to the jury, because they said, who possibly has time for your work on Venice Biennale? And of course, that's exactly the point. But if you're not in that ecosystem, fine. You know, it's as good. I'm also happy with it. In fact, I need that kind of energy of not having enough time for things in order to show my duration. So being in a hurry is just the faster brother or sister as slowing down. It's the same phenomenon. It's in both cases you miss out.
But somehow your pieces are also like, they criticize our society, as we are always somehow in a rush and hurry, and we expect ourselves to be on time and so on.
I think that's correct. They do criticize our mechanistic approach to time.
Yeah.
Yes, looking at time, I mean, we have now almost 1 hour and 45 minutes spending together. Any other urgent questions in the round, in the chat? What is this one coming up here? What are you showing now?
This is another of those studies of the piece which will be titled Backwards Growing Tree. But
Okay.
many years ago, already 2017, this was supposed to be in front of an old church in Arezzo in Italy,
Okay.
but it has changed. It became
Now it's
more
more.
abstracted.
Yeah. Mm. Yes, great. So yeah, thanks a lot, I would say. And I think something will come out of that in the ongoing seminar, and I will let you know. You know what the most of the students are doing is they don't write papers or give talks, but they prepare little video works on their own, which are about the theoretical questions that we are discussing in the seminar, you know. So I developed, Juliane and me developed it during the pandemic because giving talks online still was very unusual at the moment. And we kept it, you know. So, and if there anything comes out, we will let you know and show it to you, you know.
Great.
And Juliane will make a download of the WebEx and will share it with you, you know. So, and,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Wonderful.
I hope maybe next time on location. Who knows? That would be nice.
Let's see. Yeah, great, wonderful. Yeah. And,
All right.